Hello, hello. Can you guys hear me? Just let me know if you can. Bruno, come here. He is just sitting here wondering why I am not paying attention to him. So, say good morning, Bruno. Are you happy? Okay, so last week we spent a lot of time pressing and ironing. It's kind of crazy how much time is spent with just ironing, but it makes the biggest difference in the world. Night and day difference, and then the top stitching just holds everything together. So right now I'm kind of putting the cape on hold. I have to change the title of this video, but I'll do that after I've gone live because I'm not going to deal with it right now. But today we're going to do a side quest, and we are going to make a backpack, a really simple drawstring backpack. You guys were asking me for an easy beginner-friendly project that you could do with a sewing machine and no real, something easy, something beginner-friendly. And so I was thinking about this fabric that I had. Bruno, shh, be nice. It's a great novelty print. It's Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, I believe, because we got the mask right here. Hey. So I have not way too much of it. You can't have way too much fabric, but I have a big chunk of this fabric, and I don't need that much. And I'm going to be using that to make my backpack. Bruno, I think I'm going to ask you to wait on the floor while I sew. Is that okay? You object? That's not okay? No? Anyways, I'm live. Hello, welcome. Hello, Michael Snow. Welcome. Okay. There's not very much that you need for this project. My ribbon unrolled itself and went across the room. But I have my ribbon. Yeah, you knocked it, didn't you? Crafting level challenge, Bruno. Yeah, huh? He's been a lot more clingy lately, that's for sure. Okay, sir, I'm going to ask you to step down now. Please and thank you. You can come back later, okay? Go ahead. All right. So, anyways, as I was saying, we are going to make a backpack. I have ribbon and I have novelty print fabric. It is Zelda print. It's not my favorite game, but it is a game that I very much enjoy and do like. My favorite game, of course, is Ocarina of Time. But I do like the one that's on the Switch. I forgot what that one's technically called. But anyways, this is not my first Zelda project that I've done. I've done Legend of Zelda with Smosh a lot of times, and that was really fun. But personal projects, well, this was at my house when I moved in. Isn't this a great paper mache mask? I love it. And this was from a Yiga Clan costume that I made. It's one of those silver see-through full cover face masks. And Odin used his Cricut to cut out this decal, and then he stuck it on. But yes, Yiga Clan. This was a fun costume. Yes, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom. That one's great. I really like it. It's fun. But by far, Ocarina of Time is my favorite. But today we are just going to make a simple backpack, a fun, easy, beginner-friendly sewing project. Bruno, if you are going to object, I'm going to ask you to leave. You don't want to go? Okay, then I need you to chill. Okay? Thank you. I'm sorry. All right. Now, the thing about a backpack is there's no real... if you don't get the measurements exact, it doesn't matter because you just need your backpack to be a good rectangle. So I believe you could use 2 fat quarters. What are a fat quarter? They are just pre-cut pieces of fabric that you can get at the fabric store or Walmart. And they're usually 18 by 22. So to make a backpack, 2 of those would be perfect, a front and a back. They don't even have to match. Bruno, I'm sorry, but sir, you are going to have to go. You do not get to just sit here and cry because I cannot create things with you just being upset that I'm not paying attention to you. Okay? I'm sorry. I'm just going to go put Bruno. Look at the, can you say no to this guy? Obviously I am. Bruno, I need you to go play with Jack, okay? No? Sorry. I'm sorry. Let me see. Bruno. Bruno does not understand talking into this little black rectangle. He's like, I am right here. Why are you ignoring me? It makes no sense to him. Anyways, we need a rectangle. The size does not particularly matter. There's a couple factors that you have to keep in mind. Seam allowance and the casing for your drawstring. I'm using ribbon. You can use cording. You can use rope. You can use self fabric and make it in a tube. You can technically use bias tape. I don't recommend bias tape. Like if you're going to cut some strips from the fabric, I suggest not bias tape because bias stretches and you don't necessarily want your strings to stretch out. It's not the worst thing in the world if they do, but I don't recommend using bias tape. I don't recommend using bias tape. I'm using a grosgrain ribbon because I have a lot of it and I think it matches. So, and you're going to need more string than you think because of the way we're going to string it. But things we have to keep in mind: seam allowance, casing for our bias tape for our string. Don't use bias tape. And then also how we're going to finish our edges. On the cape, everything is encased in the lining. So you can use a lining in your backpack. That is a perfectly acceptable seam finish. The benefits of a lining is it looks super professional because there's a lining. Your seams are completely encapsulated and you could probably get a better finish overall on your entire project. The cons, it takes twice as much fabric because as much fabric's on the outside needs to be on the inside. And so if you're low on fabric, that may not be your best option. Another option is you can do sew a regular seam and do a zigzag stitch or or a pinked edge. What's a pinked edge? You know those scissors that have the zigzag edges? You use those to keep your fabric from fraying because all woven fabrics, not all woven fabrics, but a lot of woven fabrics fray. And that's why we're finishing our seams, because we don't want it to fray into where the seam is and then fall apart. Take all this time to make something, you don't want it to fall apart. And the difference between a homemade looking something and a professional looking something is finished edges, is your finished seams. And that goes for almost anything, is you got to finish your edges. My favorite way to finish edges on this is to do a French seam. And I think that's what I'm going to do today. And that's probably the most weirdly complicated way to go about this. But I think it turns out really pretty, and that's the way I want to do it. So that's the way we're going to do it. There's a lot of different factors. There's no right way and there's no wrong way to do any of these projects. What's really fun about this backpack is you get to decide how you're going to do it. Whether you're going, I'm not going to worry about my seam finishes. I'm just going to sew it and be done. Works for, it will work for the project. Probably by the time it's done, it's done. And if it's not a long-term heavy use, you should be fine. It could also be determined on the fabrics you chose, because a leather fabric or a vinyl doesn't need a seam finish. You could just leave it as is, or a felt. So these are all factors that you get to take into consideration and think about when you're deciding how big your rectangle is. For my French seam, it's going to be about, I'm going to leave about 2 inches of seam allowance, so an inch total, because I'll do a 1/2 inch, flip it, and do a 1/2 inch. And so I'm going to leave an extra inch seam allowance, so it's going to end up being 2 inches longer because there's seam allowance on this side and this side, if that makes sense. So that's what I'm kind of, I have to take that, subtract that into my finished rectangle. So I'm going to add those extra 2 inches onto my dimension. And then there's also going to be the top and the bottom. The top I have to have the casing. So I want to fold it over. So I have to have enough fabric to fold over it to create my casing. So I'm going to have to add that onto my rectangle, because if I just have this edge and I didn't think, oh, I have to fold it over to make my casing, I could be like an inch short or so. So anyways, things to keep in mind: casing and how you're going to finish your seams, because that will determine on how much seam allowance you want or need. Thank you, Not Top. You like my masks. Michael Snell, I'm sorry if you mentioned it. What kind of fabric is that? I actually have not mentioned it. Good question. This is a basic broadcloth quilting fabric. It's not a muslin because it's printed on, but it is just a basic quilting woven fabric. It's lightweight, it's not heavy. It is the easiest of the easiest fabrics to work with. It has just a simple woven pattern where it has its warps and its wefts. It has the print on this side, there's a right side, and there's an easy identifiable wrong side, so it's a really beginner friendly fabric. And it's at least a cotton blend. It probably has some polyester in it, I have no idea, but on the salvaged edge, this little edge right here where it has whatever information I get, it says do not use for children's sleepwear. It's important it says that because there are regulations on how flammable children's sleepwear can be, because certain fabrics like nylons and synthetics can like melt into plastic globs and is very dangerous. So you don't want like these nightgowns that will like burn and hurt you when they're burnt on your skin. So they have to have a certain level of flammability resistance in sleepwear. Crazy, interesting, but that's why you always see that on the labels, not suitable for children's sleepwear. And like, I was going to make pajama pants out of that, but I'm not a child, so it's okay. Anyways, that's why it says it, but it doesn't tell us what the fabric is made of or what the fiber content is, but it says that this is a trademarked print and sold for non-commercial home use only, and don't use it in children's sleepwear. But it's a cotton-based fabric. I'm not sure what's in it. It is a hand-me-down fabric from my mom's scrapyard. But there is a geometrical print here that has a very strong line. These little boxes, there's a line that you can follow. So I highly doubt that is printed straight of grain, because it hardly ever is. But I am going to tear the edge of this fabric. I know that sounds really scary, because you're like, oh no, I'm going to waste fabric doing this, but it's going to save you in the long run, because everything will line up and lay flat if you are straight of grain as much as you can. So I'm going to find out how off the print is from the actual grain line, and then I'm going to cut it to match the print, because visually it'll look better that way. But I usually only do about an inch or so, because I don't want it to be super wasteful, but it might not always be enough to do an inch, depending on how off the grain line is. Off the grain. What do I mean? See this this is wider at this side and it's narrower at this side, but fabric always tears straight of grain, especially this easy, super simple cotton woven fabric. And now I know that this line right here, that this edge that I just tore, is 100% straight of grain. Now, does it follow the pattern? Nope, it veers ever so slightly, getting less. I start off at this side with a square and a half, and then by the time I get here, that half square is gone, and by the time I get to this side, we're to half the first square. So this print is not printed straight, but it's okay. Now I know, and I can make my decisions accordingly. Sorry, let me move this out of the way. I buried my turn on my iron there. Okay. Michael Snell says, I'm confused about lining. Is that optional when it comes to bags then? Why would you want to use it and why wouldn't you? Yes, it's completely optional. There's lots of different reasons why you would want to use it and why you wouldn't want to use it. If you wouldn't want to use it because it wastes more fabric, it uses up more fabric. It doesn't necessarily waste it if it's being used. But a lining uses more fabric. It doesn't have to be the same fabric as the outside fabric. You can use a different fabric. You can use a cheaper fabric, a slipperier fabric, a more interesting novelty print fabric. It's fun. It's a design choice. You wouldn't want to use it if you don't have the resources. If you don't have extra fabric, don't put in a lining. It's not necessary. You have the resources, go for it. It's with sewing and projects, a lot of it is this really going to save me time in the long run or is it not? And sometimes seam finishes, whatever you choose, is still going to take just as much time as one or the other. So one's not necessarily easier than the other. It's just the approach you want to go about it. It is just how your brain wants to think about this problem. Sometimes my brain goes, you know what? I'm just going to give this whole thing a lining because it makes sense. Sometimes I'm like, I don't have the fabric. I don't want to deal with it. This one's not a fabric issue. I just don't really feel like I want to go through the effort of doing a fully lined bag. I think a French seam is going to be a fun and interesting seam finish for this one in particular, so I decided that that's the one I wanted to do. There's a million wrong ways to do anything. There's no right way to go about it. Yes, you can do a lining. Yes, linings have their place. No, you don't have to do one. And there's a million reasons why you would or wouldn't. Most of it is design choice. And when you are the one sewing these projects, you're the designer, you get to make these choices for better or worse. And yeah, so you get to make a choice. How am I going to finish these seams? Because these seams need to be finished. Why do these seams need to be finished? I have a tangible example. This is the thing that we were working on. This seams are finished by a lining. See this lovely lining? You don't see any frayed edges. It's all encapsulated. It looks nice and it looks professional. Now we look inside. We go inside where where it's just sewn raw together. Hold on, let me turn this whole thing inside out. And see all these strings right here? See all these messy edges? Like this green fabric doesn't really fray a lot, but this interlining does. This lining does. And inside here isn't very pretty. Now, if we don't finish our seams, this is what we're going to see when we open up our cape. Sorry, I'm live and my phone is ringing. That's okay. I'll call him back. But, so see these edges? Now, I don't have to worry about folding them under and stitching them down because they're all encapsulated in my lining. And it's going to protect those seams from washing it and wearing it and it's going to stay nice and pretty. So this is a lining as a form of a seam finish, if that makes any sense. So there's definitely reasons to do a lining, and there's reasons not to do a lining. Conservation of materials is a number one reason not to do a lining. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's the easier or the harder way to go about a problem. It's just a different way. All right. Let me just scoot over. Okay. Stay. Okay. Good questions. I still haven't cut out my rectangle. That's okay. I am going to do it. Is there a top and is there a bottom? Is there a direction to this print? Let me see. Okay. I think this print is supposed to be a non-directional print, but if we look at it, most of the people are facing up this way. And I think the pattern makes the most sense this way, even though Link in the Mask is upside down. All the other characters seem to be right side up. So if I do it this way, everybody seems to be sideways. And if I do it this way, most people seem to be upside down. So I think my best option is if this is my up. So I think that's the way I am going to cut it. And since that's my up, I want my backpack to be narrower than it is wide. I think I'll cut it to about this length and then I'll narrow it. Make it a little narrower. And now the question is whether I'm going to tear it or cut it. I think I should cut it because it's more important that I follow the pattern. Yeah, I'm going to cut it. Michael Snow, why do I mostly see linings on jackets and vests but not pants and skirts? Because jackets and vests have a lot of seams that are easier to cover with the lining than it is to like individually finish those seams, although people do that. And you can fit in a lot more structure and support into jackets and such. But pants, you start getting really bulky really quick and you don't want that much bulk. And so they usually use a waistband and keep it as minimal as you possibly can. And again, it's a bulk thing. But there are linings, there are facings. It's all just depends on the designer. There's no right or wrong way. There's a million ways to go about it. All right, I think I'm gonna give me 2 seconds. I just realized my scissors are right here. Hold on. Oh, geez. I was working on a project last week, and so all my stuff got not misplaced, just taken out and not put away. So no worries, but the project was fun. Okay, now scissors. Like I said, it's a rectangle. It's not a huge deal about the size as long as it is a size you like. And I think I am going to tear this because then I know both sides are straight up grained. All right, I have a rectangle. It is definitely wider than I want it to be. I think I'm going to cut it a little narrower. have it folded in half, I'm going to cut it on that half where I have it folded, because I definitely want it to be a rectangle that I cut on the fold, but I'm going to finish all my edges. No, this is not a professional way to cut this, but there are folds pressed into this fabric that I don't want to fight. Sometimes when fabric is left folded up and just sat there forever, there's like a permanent line in the fabric. As much as you want to steam it out, it doesn't always come out. And so instead of fighting those, sometimes I use them and I cut along, and I understand that is where that line is going to be, and everything will be fold nicer and stitch nicer and go through everything much nicer if I just respect that line and go along with it and not fight it. Just from past experience. Okay, I have fabric there. My fabric top is this way, and I'm going to cut off this selvage edge because it has these bars that I don't want to see. And I'm going to cut along this decorative printed on line because that looks like a good spot to cut to me. And then I have these strips that I can turn into scrunchies or something else. It's not a big deal. Can go into scraps land. And I have two rectangles right here that are separate rectangles. All right. I am going to deal with the casing at the top before I deal with sewing this into a pillowcase. Casing at the top, what am I talking about? I'm going to have to thread my drawstrings through the top of my bag, like a drawstring bag. And I need to create the casing that is going to go in. This is definitely my top. Okay. I'm going to mark my top with a pin. And I am going to measure down about 3 inches and cut in 1 inch. Where's my stuff? Oh yeah, I didn't put it away. It's okay. I have everything in this bag. At least I tried to. Okay, so line this up, go 3 inches down from my edge. Mark it with the pin. And I only want it 1 inch wide. I'm cutting through both layers of the fabric so that the front and the back match on both sides. I suppose I could have cut it and folded it in quarters and lined it up to make that mark. And then just done one cut. Oh, look at Okay, so I have 2 rectangles, 3 inches down, I cut 1 inch in. Now I'm going to fold that under and press it and fold it under and press it, and then I'm going to stitch it with my sewing machine. But before I ever stitch it, I am going to iron it exactly where I want it before I start sewing it. Let me turn on my iron. Michael Snell, do you wash fabric before sewing it? Yes and no. Depends on the fabric. There are fabrics that this is never going to actually be washed. It's a costume piece, or it's a commercial piece, or it's something for something specific, and I want to keep the sizing in the fabric. No, I'm not going to wash it. I'm going to leave it as is, and then I'll spot clean it or spray it down with like alcohol. for its cleaning purposes. Like if it's a delicate fabric and I don't want to risk ruining it, I will clean it other ways. But fabric like this old stash fabric, this has been through the wash and then folded and left to the side. Yeah, I do pre-wash a lot of my fabrics because cottons especially will shrink up. So when you make something, it'll get shorter and wider. Like imagine wearing a cotton t-shirt. When it shrinks in the wash, it doesn't shrink tinier evenly all around. It specifically will get, when the fibers swell up with water, they get wider because they swell up, and they get shorter because they're getting wider. And so cotton t-shirts will shrink up, and a lot of cotton fabrics will shrink up, and it's not evenly, so they'll get a little wider and shorter. So when dealing with fabrics that I know are going to shrink, yes, do pre-wash them. Otherwise, like, there are things that I know are delicate, and then there's things that I know aren't delicate. That polyester right there, that's from the 70s. It is sat in the sunshine. It is like going to be here post-nuclear whatever, when Wally's cleaning up the earth. That stuff is plastic, and it's still in pristine condition. The cotton lining, however, that will deteriorate in sunshine and needs to be pre-washed because it will shrink. But the polyester plastic, that's not going to shrink, and it doesn't have any sizing, so I wouldn't necessarily pre-wash that because it might shred it up, the edges. But you can prevent that by stitching the edges. So yes, some fabrics I do. No, some fabrics I don't. It usually depends on the final product. And I like using pieces of fabric that are in my stash for tablecloths and stuff all the time, so things get washed a lot sometimes before they ever get used. And that kind of gives me some comfort when I'm making my project, because the worst feeling is when you make something and then it shrinks, and that's happened to me more times than I care to admit. Bruno, I absolutely adore you, but I need you to be a little happier right now, okay? All right. So my iron looks hot. I'm just going to press it flat first. You can have that. All right. And then my edges, I'm going to fold under. And then under again. Sorry, Bruno. Fold it under. Under. So this side, I folded it under and folded it under, so there's no raw edge. And then it's going to be folded in half. And that's where the casing, where the ribbon's going to be threaded through the casing, and it'll have a nice pretty finished edge. So this was, I measured 3 inches down, and I cut 1 inch in, and then I have to fold it and press it. Now technically you can kind of just fold it and press it and then sew it as the casing, but you'll be much happier if you stitch it. So we're going to stitch it, but I'm going to press this first real quick. Because the secret to good sewing is actually ironing, and nobody talks about that. I don't think that's a good spot for my iron. I will move it, but not right this second. Can we get a better look at those folds, please? I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Yes, of course. Let me just fold these ones up real quick, okay? And then I will show you a nice close-up of them. Here are my rectangles with my print direction where this is going to be my top. And see how this is 1 inch in from the edge, 3 inches down. And I folded it in and then in again. So 1 inch in, and I folded it 1/2 inch and then another inch. And then I pressed it, and now it's holding it there without me having to do anything about it. So when I sew this, it's already where it needs to be, and I'm not having to, like the sewing machine is just a straight line as opposed to folding it and stitching it at the same time, which can be really complicated. So just press it, and then we're just going to stitch right along this edge so that that is a finished edge when we finish the casing, because right now we are dealing with the casing at the top before we're dealing with sewing the pieces together. All right. I have my sewing machine right here already threaded in black, so hopefully I don't have to re-thread it again. And I'm going to take just this little edge, and I'm going to stitch right to the corner and over a little bit just so that I have a pretty clean edge. Again, professional things are all about the edge finishes. Now it's sewn together and it's not going to come apart. And I get to do that to all 4 edges. Okay. And the very last one. Good question. How does the thread stay in and not pull out? Are you talking about the sewing machine or in the sewing? Because in the sewing machine, I have long tail threads. If you don't keep your threads that are coming out of your sewing machine nice and long, they will get sucked up back into your project, and you'll be like, what? I thought I was sewing and it came unthreaded. Luckily, my thread cutter is over here on the side of my sewing machine. So I have nice long threads behind my sewing machine, so I don't often deal with my sewing machine coming unthreaded while I'm working. So that was your question. Oh, the fabric. It's because they're interlocked. There are GIFs on that. I suggest you look up. They're very informative. But one comes up, the other one flips under the other side so that they interlock. My fingers going like this aren't going to fully explain it. It's one of those things that if you look up the video, you can sit there and your brain can chew on it and it'll click. But I love living in the future. Okay, so now I suppose I could have just folded it and then stitched it. That's okay. It's fine. I am going to fold this edge up 1/2 inch, press it, and then fold it over so that I have my casing. So we are ironing again before we sew. Let's do it. Right side fabric up, right here, see? Hold on 1 second, I wonder. I go like, is this a better view for you guys? Right here I have the edge right here of these two sides folded over and pressed, and then I take and then fold it over again. So we have folded and folded, and now this edge should be right at the side seams, so then when we do our French seams, it'll be fully encapsulated and we'll have nothing but pretty edges that we're looking at. So that's this side, and I'm going to stitch right along this edge to hold it down. And then after I thread the ribbon through, I'll decide if I want to stitch it a tighter casing or leave it slightly larger. But that's after I sew it. So and there we go. I'm going to take a second to snip my threads, because having all these threads start to look really unprofessional and not very good. So now that I have pulled all of these through my machine and these edges should be finished, tidying them up by clipping all the extra threads from them will make them look all done, where the threads will look like you're not done yet. So ta-da! So birdie. Let's do it to the other side. And let me just actually press out some of these wrinkles because they're bugging me. Where's the other one? Does the sewing machine, does that say speed matter? No, speed does not matter. Take it as slow as you need to. I like to drive fast, but there are times to drive slow. So you just kind of smoosh it and then you smoosh it. Then you smoosh it. So we folded the raw edge in, and then we're going to fold it down, and then it's going to be completely encapsulated, and it'll have a finished edge on all the sides and be very pretty and look impressive. So, side. How pretty. This side's finished, so let me trim off these threads while they're all in my hand. I am always covered on these. There we go. Finished edges, looking professional. All right, now we are going to sew the edges, but we're going to, instead of putting them right sides together and sewing them together like this, like you would think you were going to, we're going to do the opposite because we're doing French seams. And you will now learn what a French seam is. It is a seam that we sew with the wrong sides together. We sew a 1/2 inch, and then we put the right sides together, and we sew the seam allowance again another 1/2 inch, and then our seam allowances are encapsulated on the inside of our bag. So that's our goal. So we're going to start with wrong sides together, and it's very obvious what our wrong sides are. And I'm going to make ribbon loops at the corners because I think there's no right or wrong way to do it, and I think it will be easier to thread everything and to twist everything around. So I'm going to take about 4 inches of ribbon per corner. Let me clean up that edge. Pieces of ribbon and my my bottom corners of my bag. I'm going to measure an inch up from the bottom. I just had my measuring tape here a second ago. Right here. I knew it. So I'm going to measure up 1 inch. Whoops. Keep the corners lined up. Inch up. It's right there. All right, I marked where the inch is, and then I went right above that with my ribbon because that inch is going to be taken up in seam allowance. So I went right above that because I want this little loop to be right at the corner. And do the same thing on the other side. Okay, I have my loopies pinned in place, and let me line up my edges nice. I'm going to sew this at 1/2 inch, wrong sides together. I did a double back stitch. I went back and stitched it twice, so there's 3 lines of stitching through it. Through the ribbon, just to reinforce it a little bit. And again, I'm only doing the long side. I'm not doing the bottom edge. So I'm doing this side, and now I'm doing this side. We'll worry about the bottom in a second. We'll make it as easy as we can. So let me stitch this. think I'm ever so slightly off here. It's okay though, I'll figure it out. Ow! There we go. That's laying better now. Okay, have my right sides together. Now I'm just going to press these open. Oh, good question. Why a French seam and not a regular one? Because it's how I want to finish the edges. I think it will look really nice and neat, and it will give it a little bit more structure and support in a nice way. Because I want to completely encapsulate my seams. And regular seam finishes, I don't think look as pretty as a French seam. And honestly, it's just purely a style choice for me at the moment of why I chose French seams versus a regular one. Now, if I did a regular seam, I could technically be done if I did these right sides together and I just stitched it, and then I have these raw edges, and over time these will peel and fray, and I could zigzag over the edges, I could serge it. There's a million ways to go about solving this problem. I like the French seam, so that's what we're going to do. It is just purely my choice of why we're doing French seams, but I like it. So, all right, let me press this real quick. Press it open. See my seam allowance right there? We're not going to see that anymore, because now we're going to flip it right sides together. And press it right on that seam again. So it's super, super, super flat. And now we're going to take the seam and throw it through the sewing machine. But because this top part is a little ugly, I'm just going to fold it under in itself and stitch that down real quick before I start sewing it. Now I finished the top little edge of that, and now I'm just going to follow along the whole Now this is inside my bag, and this is what I just sewed. I turn it right side out. This seam looks clean. It's a flat seam. And inside my bag, there's no raw edges because it's in its own little pocket. The seam allowance is flat, it's clean, and there's no raw edges. They're completely encapsulated. Close up. See, they're completely encapsulated in this. There's no raw edges because this was stitched and then it was folded inside out and then it was stitched again. And from this side, it just looks like a regular seam. Can't even see where it's at. It's right here's the seam. So that is a clean edge versus the inside of it looking like this if I didn't do any seam finishes, where you just see the raw and frayed edges. So let me press the other side and this side flat real quick. Press this side. I press it flat to kind of seal the stitches together. It just kind of, I don't know, feels like it reinforces the seam. And then I press it open to really get that edge clean on the inside. And then I stitch it inside out the way I want it to lay. Stitch it. Then I press it inside out the way I want it to lay. And with all those extra ironing steps, it looks very crisp, clean, and finished. As opposed to poofy, smooshy. Side that I already did. Okay. So now I'm going to just fold in the top so it's a clean edge. I just pulled it out with that string. Fold it in so it's pretty and no raw edges exposed. Just do a little straight stitch. Okay. Yes, Michael Snell, both of those stitches were about a ½ inch. The first one I sewed was a little under, and the second one I sewed was a little over, because I don't want to get the seam allowance caught in my seam allowance. And now this lovely tube. I can sew the bottom of it. Again, we're going to do the wrong sides together, stitch it 1/2 inch, and then do the right sides together and stitch it the 1/2 inch. Let me just press this flat and open and nice. So many little threads. Let me chop these off. Those can go. There we go. Okay, and you smoosh it and you smoosh it. Oh, here, hold on, let me trim up the bottom. It was ever so slightly off of grain. Let me true that up. My little bottom loopy things are still sticking out. I didn't accidentally get those caught. All right, let me stitch up the bottom. Now when we turn it inside out, or I mean right side, yeah, inside out. These corners are going to have these edges folded onto them like this, and that's just really neat. It's going to make a very clean, nice corner. And so I'm going to make those as sharp as I can and press it. I'm going to try not to get this loopy thing up here caught in my seam. In fact, I'm going to pin it so that it can't get caught in my seam, hopefully. Okay. This side too. See these edges completely encapsulated, and they'll be nice and clean. And this is great for fabrics that fray or fragile or heavy duty. Yeah. Okay, let me press it. So now it's all pressed and all pretty. The pin is holding the ribbon out of the way so I don't accidentally catch it. Hopefully I don't accidentally catch it. Had a thread looped around it. It's okay. When doing French seams, you can just trim your seam allowance, but I do one slightly wider and one slightly narrower. Trim my threads, because this inside edge should be done. Oh yeah, the tops. All right, now we can turn it right sides out. I have to trim these. These are from my seam allowance. I just kind of peeked out. Okay. Now the hard part in the sewing's over. Now I just have to thread it. Let me pull this out of the way. Would make a lovely skirt now, or shorts. Honestly, I was thinking of using it to make a pair of pants. Not necessarily pajama pants, but I am wanting a pair of harem, like Princess Jasmine genie pants. And I was thinking of working out the pattern in this fabric because I thought it'd be fun to have some novelty print fabric pants and then also figure out the pattern. That's what this weird plastic thing back here is. Believe it or not, it's a pattern for a pair of pants. It's a vintage pant kit where you can figure out your exact measurements with the little plastic things that they got. It's really cool. But that's a project for another day. Today, we gotta thread this. All right, I have my ribbon. Now, the ribbon needs to fit from the bottom to the top, all the way threaded through this way, all the way threaded through back, and then back down to the bottom plus a little bit for a knot. So that is how long you determined your ribbon length. It's longer than you think it's going to be. This is about 2 yards, I'd say. 1, 2, 3. A little less than 2. A little less than 3 yards. I'm gonna make these the same size before I thread this one through. I'm lucky that if I screw this up, I have more ribbon, but this should be a-okay. All right, 2 pieces of ribbon, and no, my emergency safety pin isn't where it belongs. This makes me very sad. It's usually on this. My emergency sewing needle's where it belongs. Ah, yes, I used it on a pair of pants. Oh, well. I have another safety pin right here. It's just had that one in my head, so I was like, well, it should be right there where it's supposed to be. Okay, so ribbon. I'm gonna go through this side. I can do it. I can thread it. That's witchcraft as far as I'm concerned. Honestly, pants are hard. There's a reason that people throughout history just started with skirts and were like, oh, yep, this robe is great. Because pants are hard and confusing, but then once you figure them out, they're super simple and easy, and they're fun. So just because they look crazy doesn't mean that they are. I would try making a pair of pajama pants. They're fairly, really simple to make. Okay, so I have mine threaded this way. And now let's thread the other one. It's threaded through this way. And now we have to thread it through the other way. Otherwise, it won't work as a drawstring bag. You need double the thread or the ribbon, rope, etc. for drawstring bags than you think you need, because it needs to loop all the way through this way and then all the way through the other way. Otherwise, you're not going to get the right scrunch. And the mechanics of it won't work. How do patterns work? We're not all the same size. Michael Snell, I'm a big guy. I don't think they make patterns for me. Well, yes, they do. They don't make all the patterns, and they don't always make them the best. I worked making patterns for wedding gowns made to each bride's measurement. Now, the thing is, I can tell you, is as much as there are very similar size people, nobody's the same shape. Nobody. And it's a difficult thing to do. Look at that. Drawstring works. All right. These are even. These are even. Thread it through the loopy. And I'm just going to tie this in a knot, although I may thread on some beads for fun later, just because I can. But now we have a backpack. And I can adjust the length of these straps as I need, but I have more than enough strap for my backpack. But I need it. Out very nice. Anyways, about patterns. Okay, So for patterns, people are all sorts of different shapes and sizes. We're generally similar shapes and sizes, like you can fall into categories. That's why small, medium, large typically kind of works. But if you're taking the time to make the patterns for yourself, you can really make those fine-tune adjustments as to armhole depth. A lot of men's clothing, they just make giant armholes to fit a variety of sizes as opposed to specific sizes, because the larger the armhole, the more people you can fit, but the larger the armhole, the less range of motion, and also, honestly, it's more dumpy. I don't like huge armholes, but when they're way too high up in your armhole, that's uncomfortable too. So there's a lot of varying factors and things that you can adjust. Men's pants, they put like an inch on either side of the center back of the waist so that you can adjust the hips and such. But the thing is we're generally like the same structure. So if you can focus on your shoulder to shoulder when you're looking at your patterns, you can kind of adjust there, because that's where I feel like the fit falls apart. If it doesn't fit your shoulders, if it's too wide for your shoulders, the neckline's not going to lay right. If it's too narrow, it's not going to. So really focusing on trying to get your shoulder to shoulder to work. But there's a lot of wiggle room, and you got to try it on. And there's a learning curve. Patterning can be really freeing, and it can also be really intimidating at the same time, because you're building the pattern pieces from scratch. But once you know your basic size and shape, you can take that one pattern and adjust it into anything you want. So taking the effort to make or figure out a pattern that fits you basically can go a long way. Don't worry, I am only live, but I will have to get back on the phone in a minute. But yes, so pattern drafting, it's completely doable. It's not as intimidating as you think, but there is a learning curve, and you have to just kind of be patient with yourself. And then also, it's okay to make muslins and twills. What's a muslin or twill? Depends on what you call it. A practice garment. Figure out the fitting issues, where everything needs to be, and then use that for your adjustments. I know is easier said than done, but I have practiced what I preached. This dress is made to my measurements. I pattern drafted it from the ground up. Here's one of the pattern pieces. I called it the Tink bodice because it was originally a Tinkerbell costume that I used as my twill to figure out the pattern and fitting issues, and then I did it and used that exact same pattern to make other dresses and things based on those. So yes, I believe in you. You can do it. And also, if you don't want to start from scratch, you don't have to. There are patterns for you at the fabric store. They have them in variety of sizes, and you can scale up if you need to, focusing on the shoulder to shoulder and kind of keeping the shape as you need. And you can also do a mock-up out of cheaper fabric to see how the fit's going to be before you use your nice fabric, which I recommend, but I don't always do, because if I'm going through the effort to sew, I kind of want a project at the end of it, and I don't really like having just non-garment garments. I usually turn those into something else, hence the Tinkerbell costume. That was a twill that I was figuring out, but then I didn't want to waste my sewing on. Yes, I'm a very popular person today. I am not answering my phone, and apparently this is the time for everyone to call me, but I'll call them back. It's all good. I hope you guys enjoyed the little bit of a break from this project. I'm waiting on the decor, the details, the decorating. I need to make the little peoples, and I need to make sure everything's in scale. So I'm just taking a little bit of a break from it. And just in case you guys were wondering, the cage still exists. This is going to go to hold its shape. So we will get back to that project. If you guys missed me last week, I was working on a commercial, so that was fun. And I will be here again next week. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Not top. That's always a great feeling, finishing a project in one sitting. Yes, I kind of needed a win. I had this fabric where I was like, am I going to waste this fabric on this dress? No, I'm going to do it anyways. And then I made it and I wasted the fabric on the dress because I should have done a mock-up. And so I felt like a failure and I needed just a little win so I can go back to that project and make it better. But yeah, sometimes just doing a small project and having it finished feels really good. And I can go on a picnic with this. You like the idea of a picnic? How about on a walk? You want to go on a walk with that? Yeah? Okay. All right. I think Bruno has had enough of me going live. We finished the project. Thank you guys for joining me. I'll see you guys next week. Bye. All right, Bruno, that's enough.